Welcome to another broadcast of The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. We welcome your questions and comments. Send them to us at dj@artistfirst.com. And now here they are, folks. We call them Mr. and Mrs. Lyons.
Yes, we are. Thank you, Scott. We are Mr. and Mrs. Lyons, and this is Radio Free America.
And I'm Mrs. Lyons.
And she's Mrs. Lyons. And we're coming to you from an undisclosed location, which could or could not be a bunker, and there's a cat here. Hello, cat. In fact, we're coming to you from our normal broadcast on the normal time with the normal people, with the abnormal cat, because everything's going to be just fine.
That's right.
and you know, last show, we don't often do topical shows, but you know, the world is coming apart, so we're doing topical shows. And last show we did talk a little bit topically about the you know, the kind of the situation we find ourselves in, and we gave our take on it, you know. And this show, I don't know if the graphic's up yet, but it will be soon. We wanted to talk. It came to me actually in the middle of the afternoon today, in between deep meditative states, or you know, something. That we're probably all as a people and as a world feeling a little bit cooped up right now. And there's good reasons for that, and you know, months or years or decades from now we won't remember those reasons, but there are good reasons for that right now. But it doesn't make it any more pleasant. None of us, the human spirit, you know, the human heart, resonates with freedom, and I say that with the capital F. Our souls and our defining characteristic of our souls, of our incarnated spirits here, is the freedom with which we exercise our will. You know, our free will and our freedom is essential and important to us all. And you can see that both small and large. If you want to see someone get angry, the very first thing you can do, all you have to do rather, is restrict their freedom. And I've noticed over the last few days, over the last week or two, that there's a lot of frustration out there. You can see it on the roads, and you can see it in people's faces. And you know, we're sort of in a worldwide or maybe a nationwide sort of 7 steps of grieving. I think we're up to bargaining and alcoholism at this point, or just alcoholism, which is always fun. But in truth, this is an assault on something that's basic to us all. This idea of being able to move around and be free, and we're all being very mature. We understand what we're trying to do. We understand, in fact, that we're trying to do it for the betterment and for the good of others and for our fellow man. And sometimes we're talking about, you know, our own relatives or our own parents or if we're of a certain age, you know, ourselves. But we're also talking about it in broad, in large, in people who are faceless and that we're never going to meet, from the point of view of sacrificing a little bit, all of us sort of collectively sacrificing a little bit of our freedom, something that's very, very precious to us, to benefit, you know, folks who we probably will never meet. But yet there's sort of an esprit de corps, a sort of camaraderie about it. But, you know, all that, we try to put that all in nice flowing terms, but in the middle of the night you go, damn it, I want to do X, Y, or Z, you know? I wanted to go on that cruise. I wanted to go to the beach. I wanted to go do something fun. And it frustrates us, and it makes us a little bit on edge. And so I thought, in the middle of the afternoon, in between meditation sessions and deep alcoholism, I said to myself, the true seed of freedom, or really the thing that you can't actually divorce from anyone, is their freedom. It really comes down to the way, and we talked about it last week, you know, with Tolle. His last point in his sort of litany of points was that, you know, he talked about acceptance, but in fact what it really is the kernel of acceptance is changing the way you think about something, because your freedom, which you can think has been taken away from you, can never actually be divorced from you, no matter what someone will do. And there are extreme circumstances, where you've been actually imprisoned and actually had your freedom taken away, or you're actually being oppressed, actively being oppressed. You had Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the gulags. You had many examples throughout history where an oppressed people found the freedom which underlies all things, which is the freedom of thought, the freedom of the mind, the freedom that no one can take away from you, but yet is so easily lost through your own action, through believing that you're not free, in essence, using your mind to imprison yourself. So that's our topic for tonight. That freedom, the sentence is freedom is in your mind, but it's really freedom is always there. You merely have to exercise it. And the Buddha quote is the best one. Maybe you read the Buddha quote. Do you have it in front of you? If you don't, I can read it.
Hold on a sec.
Buddha's always good at these things. He was he had great speechwriters, Buddha. Mrs. Lyons is going to read it now. I'm in such trouble.
The price of freedom is simply choosing to be. Liberation is in the mind.
Yes.
And what you were speaking of, where we're observing ourselves and many, many people, everyone around us, suddenly your freedom to do your everyday routine has been cut. And you never thought anything in this sweet world would be able to stop that. That was the last thought on your mind. It was such a basic assumption that you just lived and breathed that way. How many times have we seen the way people had say, okay, this is a typical day, you get up early, you shower, change, a quick breakfast, you drive to work 8 hours, you drive home, you do homework with the kids, get ready for bed, go to sleep, and then do it over again. Everyone thought that was a baseline, that doesn't change. And then suddenly, life happens.
Very, very true.
And you are up against something that you have absolutely no control, and you cannot believe that anything would be able to have control over that. Because when you exercise your free will, you believe nothing can change that, impinge on it, change it in any way, because you've already decided. Until reality steps in. And there are realities out there that you haven't even considered, you had never put into the mix. So a vast number of people are going through this. And suddenly you're discovering how human you actually are, how similar your reactions are to being constrained. What do you mean I can't go out? What do you mean I have to stay here? You're saying it's for my own good, but I don't see that.
Right.
Or, okay, let me consider it. Well, and how is it being considered? It's being considered in a way to explain to yourself why it doesn't apply to you. And it's usually because that focus is so singular, it's got to be for your satisfaction, instead of understanding that you're actually participating in a much wider world. And your world is actually asking you to consider it and everything that makes up your world. This is probably a mind-expanding, world-expanding experience for most people, because they don't usually think of anything except what it is that they'd like to do for the next moment.
What you want to eat or whatever. And we said, I'm not sure we said it last week, but last week we were talking about grievers. We're talking about people who've already had a world-shattering experience. And the fact that in this type of experience, you learn a lot about reality and about acceptance and about what you just said, which is that our very narrow, insular kind of considerations of what we consider our rights, our freedoms, are sort of externalized. They're kind of tied into things, the routine, the whatever I want to eat, whatever I want to do. We haven't come to the nub of freedoms, because when you get to the nub of freedoms, I mentioned Solzhenitsyn, but we could just talk about kids in the cancer ward. All their freedoms are pared away from them, sometimes rapidly and ruthlessly and cruelly pared away from them. They go from what everyone considers a normal life, although that's an undefinable term, but let's just say what everyone considers a normal life, to one which is singularly focused on two things: the next breath and trying to deal with maybe pain or loss or suffering.
No, quite literally your next breath.
Yes.
Okay, it's not just, oh, well, I have to take my next breath. It's like, no, survival. It's in its most basic form. This is the first time people have looked around and said, this is survival for other people.
Well, right, but yes. And our talk last week, we were talking about once you've gone through that, but at the moment of having it happen, which is where we are right now, there is this, we talked about the 7 stages of grief. There is a mourning process to the loss of your freedoms. And if it's so acute, see, I told you the cat would do this. We talk about cute, she goes, but if it's so acute, if your loss of freedoms is so acute, which happens to these kids, or it can happen to people in other circumstances, it's like your heart has been almost stopped.
Right.
But this is a little more gradual. So you have this time for this mental sort of machinations and reflections and frustration and why me and woe is me and all this other stuff that you kind of protest. The focus, though, when you are stripped down to it's you and real reality, changes you. It puts you into a mode where you must understand our saying here from Buddha, that you aren't defined by the outside reality. You're not defined by the disease. You're not defined by the fact that you no longer have these sort of mental freedoms that you had, all these kind of, I think I can do this and I think I can do that, because that kind of diffuses your existence into the physical and into the trivial. And when all that physical and trivial is narrowed down to the next breath, you have a stark choice to make. And the choice is, are you going to let the external and the suffering and all the things that are happening to you right now define you and in some ways imprison you? Or are you going to realize that none of that matters if I say it doesn't? If I think in my existence, in my life, in my mind, that this is not who I am. This is not my being. This is all the things that are external to me. And that my true freedom and my true freedom of being is simply what Buddha says, simply choosing to be. And there's you can't see it because you can't see the picture, but there's a lovely comma right there. Simply choosing to be is the end of the phrase. Being is where you end up when everything else has been stripped away from you. So acutely, it becomes very, very apparent. But right now, things are being stripped away from us. But you still have the being, the you that is you, the you that is being in this situation. And it gives you wonderful, incredible insight. And it gives, when you choose that freedom of being, that it doesn't matter what's happening and who says what and what's this and what I can't do and what's going to happen and what are the worry of the future, the regret of the past, what we could have done, what we should do. All that stuff is no more than bars of the cage that you're kind of trying to trap yourself in. And yet you're sitting there with the key in your hand, or figuratively, the being.
Well, it's being caught up in the moment and believing that your schedule and your surroundings and your things, your money, the lack thereof, matter more than anything else. And you get caught up in that. But when you get down to the foundation of your humanity, you realize that you are not alone in this situation. It is you and members of your family and your neighbors and the whole region surrounding you, as well as the rest of the states and the rest of the country and the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Okay, so suddenly you're touching on the commonality of humanity.
Yes.
This is very much a human condition, and everyone's response is very similar. That feeling of, oh no, what do you mean? And it's various degrees. Some people will choose to be angry over being sad because it feels more powerful to be angry than sad. But understanding that anger is rising from the fact that the loss of your freedom is such a deep affront to your soul. That it's the depth of that sorrow. I mean, that can lead into a deep depression. But you don't want to go there, so you choose to be angry and express somehow to the outside world that, hey, what are you doing to me? Just the general world in general is putting this type of pressure on me. I'm going to just...
Do you know who I am?
Well, the ego. That's exactly the ego saying that.
Exactly the ego, yes.
But if you understand that the situation that you happen to be in is not in your control, nor is it in anyone else's control, I think that thought alone is so scary for most people. They'd rather run screaming from the room and let's not talk about it. I don't want to look at that. What do you mean everything is out of control? Not so. Not so, I say. And it's like...
Not so, I say.
But there's a part that wants to scream that, and that is that mental capacity. All right? And that's because you've outlined your world in a very defined sense. You have put your borders around your world in comfortable places that you are able to touch, contact, and control in some manner. This is what you believe. And so, well, this is my world. Exactly. And whenever anybody seems to disturb those boundaries, of course, the immediate reaction is, I'm going to hit you.
Right.
No way, no, anger, because you want to make sure that border is up. But now we're in a situation where all the borders are down, people.
Well, yes, and again, you pack so much into a statement. I mean, let me go back and say that what you're talking about, this statement of Buddha is always, the Buddhists always have the mind involved, but the simply choosing to be is something which comes from the heart. The being state is in the heart, and when people have been pushed down from their mental state of control, 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 control. They have to face the heart. They have to come into grips with the heart.
Choosing is done by your will,
Mm-hmm.
and your will directs you to do or to be. So when you choose to be, that connection allows for filling of the heart into the here and now, the awareness of the here and now. And that is a very different thing, because the being state is something that is always there, but you choose to participate or not.
Well, based right on there is what I was trying to illuminate. What you said was, in essence, that this, let's call it this giant tide of change that's now come in, and it's affecting everybody. It puts you in touch with the commonality. The commonality is in the heart, and it also, it's like the, let's call it the illumination, the insight that was given to our friend Mr. Buddha when he realized that all life was suffering. That was a realization, even though he at that moment his own life was probably pretty good, and he could see that the world, the connection to being and to the fact that all life, and now when you're in one of these storms, which is what we're in right now, you can be in it acutely. The acute storm is you're in a cancer ward with your son or your daughter. That's an acute storm. But everyone says, oh, well, that can never happen to me. So they insulate themselves. They isolate that. It's something which, that happens to those people, but not to me. Well, let me just finish. But right now you can't do that. Now it's happening to everyone. So now it's an all life is suffering moment. Go ahead. You were just going to say.
Well, when you see something like that, where a child has cancer, you basically say, well, that's not my world. My borders don't include that.
Right. So you reject it.
Well, I've chosen where my borders are. I've chosen where my borders are.
Yes. And now that's been broached. Now in this current situation, and I'll say this, although people will maybe it can always be worse. And people say, but if you've been there, like last week's show, if you've been there, it can always be worse.
It can always be worse.
And even when we were where we were, we used to say after a while you get to these insights, and you're talking to your son or your daughter, it can always be worse. And that's not a despair statement. I'll just digress for a moment. That's the acceptance, and that it's good now, enjoy now. But I digress. Where we are now is it's forcing people into the to the realization that those borders are coming down, that you're not in control, and that's actually the reality that everyone denies by putting up the walls and going la 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 la. I can't hear you, because
you guys don't know what you're talking about. My world's never been like that, so it can't happen.
Right. It's this lovely delusion.
Denial. The
that,
lovely river that people sail down.
The Egyptian river. So that word, again, we mentioned a couple times the 7 stages of grief or whatever it is, but that's one of them. Denial is one of them. Is you initially can try to put up the walls again, but it's harder now, because it's harder when you have acute illness or an acute some acute affliction, because that gets knocked down fast and it stays down. But here, these have been knocking down kind of slowly, and it's very comforting to deny, and it's part of our nature. I'm not trying to judge. It's part of our nature to deny. It's probably a survival characteristic to be able to deny things and say, no, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. And there's a good point when you get to the point and you are in center and you are in the heart to say it will be fine. That's not also not a bad thing to hold keep in your heart. As you said, fill your heart from the aspect of being. But right now, people's borders have been knocked down and they get angry. They try to define and deny and then defend and push those borders up and be mad at people and be mad at everybody.
Well, yeah, it's the characteristic. It's got to be somebody else's fault.
Got to be someone else's fault.
There's somebody that we have to blame.
right? And then you're living in the past, or you're living in the future of worry and what could happen, and this could happen, and that could happen, and overwhelm yourself that way. But I think where we are right now, amazingly, sort of let's say it's been a while that we've had this sort of situation come in and affect the world, but even if it's just say affecting everybody you know, which is oftentimes what people call what they really are talking about when they talk about the world, is everybody they know is being in some way affected. We are brought in touch with our common humanity, and we are seeing that the being state is asserting itself because it was always there. It was always the actual truth. And so in accepting that, you're freeing yourself. This was our beginning of the premise, is that this all feels knocking down the borders and then having this thing come in and you feel trapped and you feel overwhelmed and you're regretting and you're worrying and you're doing all these things, and then you get angry and you're trying to fight all it, and then you get all the way down to the point where you say, well, it is okay. Even where I am right now, I've learned something. I'm starting to understand what the being state is. I'm getting back to the true me, the true heart, which isn't defined by what's happening around me. You're starting to get, anecdotally anyway, where people are starting to say, well, I'm getting in touch with my neighbors who I haven't talked to in years, or I'm finding different aspects of the people that I cherish, that are in my life, that are in my family. I'm understanding, that there's a certain selflessness to this idea of sacrificing something of mine, something precious, my freedom, to help a situation which no one really can fix individually, but collectively and with time will change and will be fixed. And so that is starting to ameliorate this idea of being imprisoned. And I think that where we are right now is it's time to think about that. Maybe there's another step here. Maybe it really comes down to that. And this is the scary realization. You mentioned it earlier. It's really always this way. I'm going to stop right there for a second. Say it again. It's really always this way. And we lie to ourselves in a comfortable way about what it really isn't. And we have control. It really is always this way. And these are the moments of truth that are scary because we're not used to dealing with the truth. When you get this acute diagnosis of cancer in your child, there's all those stages of grief. And then you get to the point where you realize this is where you are. And then you get to the point where you realize that it's always this way all the time. And then, you're led by some of these incredible insights that these children would have, or your own. You get to the point where you realize that there's a freedom there in being. And when you get to that freedom of being, it's really scary because you have to make a leap of faith. But when you've done it, and we talked about it last week, you're really going to learn something about yourself. And I'm not going to say that you have to or you're going to, but the kind of scariest thing I'll say right now is that it's always this way. And we're now, as a world, all of a sudden feeling that. You can't just say, oh, it's those people in that country, or it's those people in that town, oh, it's those people who have cancer. It's really all of us right now. So there's a real opportunity here. Not one we would have chosen.
Well, and maybe we should take our break.
We'll choose to take a break. So let's choose to go back to the studio. You think about the fact that it's always like this and it's never going to be like this. No. Think about, just take a little break, take a deep breath, and we'll come back and talk about a little bit more about freedom.
The wait is over. First Blood, Book 2 of the Blood series is out. Your favorite bad boy thief Dev is back, and the beautiful and deadly Trey is right there with him. She is sharp, sexy, and full of surprises. Their adventures continue as a new power arises to threaten the world. The heart of creation is under attack, and time is definitely not on their side, as they battle against their enemies' undead hordes. Can they unlock the hidden power that can defeat him, or will his forces draw first blood? Get all 3 installments in the series. Book 0, It's in the Blood. Book 1, Destroyer's Blood, and the new release, Book 2, First Blood, today. Available in ebook and paperback format on Amazon, Kobo, Apple, and most other fine e-tailers.
The Timeless Esoterica radio program with Dr. Bruce is broadcast on the 4th Monday of every month at 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. Eastern on ArtistFirst.com. We explore topics including the paranormal, alien life, mysteries, conspiracies, hidden history, oddities, and much more. Each show will feature a special guest with exciting and thought-provoking discussion. Always keep an open mind, an open heart, live forever, and remember Dr. Bruce believes in you.
The Fat Man Gets Out of Bed is the latest book from Michael Lyons, the award-winning author of There is a Reaper. Featuring 13 original stories, this wide-ranging collection has everything. Forbidden love, gods versus demigods, weird invading aliens, sexy seductive artificial intelligence, and unusual passion between the living and the dead. All set amidst fantastic worlds of pain and loss and boundless...
By Bob Marley. No,
Freedom.
By Freedom. So we've been talking, this is welcome to the second half of The Soul of Everyman, and we are the people that you're listening to. And we've been talking about, we've been talking a little bit about freedom and a little bit about the fact that freedom can never be divorced from you or from any of us, because it is really an essential component of our incarnation here, of our souls. But the realization of that, because we are who we are, people in general are seduced by the material. We're seduced by our mental machinations. We're seduced by this idea that we can control everything. We throw ourselves into these things, and we build up the walls and the barriers, and we say those are those people, that's only happens to those people, and this I have my insurance, and this I have my plans, and all the other things I can do every day. And then we in doing that kind of divorce ourselves from this idea that we are beings who are free, and we have this amazing free will, and that that our freedom comes from that directly. It's not an external thing. And then we get this huge sea change in our lives. We're going through one right now as a world and as a people. And all of a sudden you are tossed into this tempestuous sea. You are all the things, all the walls, all the barriers come down, and you have an experience of the lack of control and the lack of all these things and how ephemeral they are. And you realize, and this is what happens in acute illness, and it happens in many other ways, but this is a way where you realize that the thing that you have, the being that you are, isn't defined by any of those things. Those were all kind of chimera and lovely sort of fantasies that we had built up all around us. But when they're all busted away, when they're all broken away, there's still the you there. There's still your heart, there's still your free will, there's still your ability to choose what you think about the situation and not be swept up into regrets in the past, into worries in the future. You come to this idea, and Tolle is the expert, the power of now, which is his phrase, but it's really a phrase which is inherent in all of us. The being that we are is a being which bees right now, all the time. And in the being that you are right now, you have incredible, really ultimate freedom. The freedom is inalienable from you. That may sound familiar to you from the point, from history class, but it's inalienable to you always, regardless of whether you're an American or an Armenian or a Chinese or anybody. A person, a human being, is inherently free, regardless of situation. But you only start to realize it, sort of uncover it and rediscover it when all these illusions have been stripped away. And so it's sort of terrible in one way, because we have to have these things blown away from us to realize it or to be forced into it. But it's also amazing, and it goes to the heart of the resiliency of our souls and our spirits and our eternalness. That's part of why it's inalienable, because we are eternally existing, eternally free.
It reveals how fixated you are on your chosen reality. Because you want to choose the boundaries of your world. You want to say, what can participate in your world and what can't. But the truth of the matter is, it's really not in your control. And because we habitually go back to what we believe is real, because we chose it, you begin to rely on those physical, outward things and habits, and believe, well, this is my world. This is just how my world functions, and you poor souls, you can't function in my world, kind of thing, until something comes by and washes all that away. All those preconceived notions and all those ideas. And the thing that people get angry at is the fact that it nulls your choices. So you're telling me my choices don't mean anything?
Exactly.
I mean, that reality, I think, is blowing people's socks off. What do you mean my choices don't mean anything? What do you mean something's more important than my choices? How could that be?
What?
And it's, again, how small is your world or how large is your world? Because you have to go back to that foundation. What have you included in your world? Is it just your concerns? Or maybe you've extended it to the people you kind of work with? Hopefully you've extended to your family, but usually those are like circles that sort of intersect in the place you call home for a short period of time, and then you go back out on your orbits into your own little worlds. So suddenly now all these circles have got to focus on home. Because you've got to be where you call home.
Where the heart is.
Among other things. And suddenly you're rediscovering each other and maybe rediscovering why you decided to make your boundaries so far away from each other.
Yeah. But there's something very profound there, Mark. And the profound thing that there's always something profound in what you say, but the very profound thing in what you said is that the stripping away is also, it becomes a focal point. In other words, you now can't, my routine, your routine, my orbit, your orbit, they all become one. They all become one, and
they become centralized.
Yes, but then what the defense mechanism of routine is, well, my routine is blown up right now because I don't know, we lost power or there's a huge snowstorm, but other people still have it good. So then I want to go back to my routine, and I'm frustrated and angry. But if you really are in a situation where it's the playing field has been leveled from the point of view of reality has affected really everything. And when you're in the situation, it's two ways to get there. We mentioned both of them before. When you're in this acute situation, you realize that there is no other reality than the situation you're in, and that doesn't matter. The rest of it doesn't matter. It's existential. But here, it's not as existential as much as it's universal. It's inescapable. Everyone is in this situation, and you can't say, well, they have it better and they have it worse. Even though people are trying to do those distinctions, it's a thing that has overcome all these kind of little boundaries. And the focal point of everyone being in the family, in the house, focal point, but the family has grown to the world. We're all in the house. We're all now focused to the degree that we realize it on our humanity and where we are, and stripping away the extraneous. So it's a very profound thing to have this, realize that you can't escape. You can't escape the being, and you can't escape all the beings in the creation that you're in. And if you just take the next step, which is a very scary step, that it's always that way, that this is the realness of real reality, and that all those illusions, and that's what Buddha was seeing through the veils, seeing through the illusion. His way was through all life is suffering, but you can get there in a different way, many, many different ways. The way to get through the veils of the things that we build up, these sort of false distinctions, and then you're there and you're focused. Man, I'm going to be right here with you for an undefined period of time, and now I have my choice.
And that's the other thing, the undefined period of time, because the mind is always trying to figure out how to get control of this.
Yes.
So like tell me so I can plan.
Right.
And
right.
And the mind can't plan. Isn't that an amazing thing?
It drives.
It's a tearing away of habit forms
Yes.
that you have always used as security, because there's always another way to work it. You just haven't thought of it. And that's the accusing voice in your head. Instead, because that thought is supposed to keep you away from the reality that you really don't have control. Oh, no, there must be a way to get control. I've got to be able to influence this in some way. What do you mean my decisions mean nothing?
Right. And the other thing you said is perfect, because what are all the voices? You hear many voices now in this particular situation. Well, can you tell us exactly how long it's going to last? Because then they have this, well, you're right or you're wrong, and then if you're right, I can blame you. If you're wrong, I can blame you. It's all that the mind is like a little rabid beast in a cage trying to find a way to reestablish the wall somehow. Well, if I know it's going to be 37 days and 2 seconds, then I'm going to say at the 37th day and the 3rd second, you're wrong. If I can plan, the mind is relentless in its quest to reassert control.
Well, it's not. Let's just redefine this, okay? Because what we're actually talking about is the ego.
Yes.
Okay, the mind itself is an amazing, amazing part of you, all right?
Yes.
And very broad. And there is such a thing as a sound mind. We are talking about unsound minds.
Talking about me. Go right ahead.
And we are talking about the ego at this point, because the ego wants to reassert control. And it's realizing that you as a being are identifying with something besides the ego. And it doesn't want to lose that control. It wants to drive the car. Okay?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
It wants to be in control. It wants to tell you where to go and what to do. But when you understand that you are more than just the ego, and your being state is far greater than ego, and what you think and what your preferences are, it opens up a world that's truly amazing, because suddenly you are free of your own ego constraints.
Right.
When you realize you've built a prison out of your chosen traits and tendencies and preferences, you must realize that that is your ego constructing a box by which it can control the next step. Because you don't tell me what I can't do. I have the freedom to decide what I want. And it's like, okay, that's your ego speaking, and you wanna justify it by saying, well, I think, basically blaming your mind. My mind says this. It's like, no, this is your ego talking. This was an ego trip that you wanted to take. And to realize that most of the things that you've constructed have been ego trips all through your life. How do you get free from the cage, the rat race? You're constantly running, doing the exact same things because you are at the beck and call of your ego. Do you really want that to be your life story?
Well, again, first of all, perfectly said. The ego prison is the ego makes this prison, and it's truly a gilded cage. And it says that this is the world, and this is your freedom, and it's all based on this ego cage. And the door to actual freedom is the ego says it's scary because you don't know what's going to happen. You can't control it.
That's it's too big.
Too big. The ego hates it. It wants the box. It wants that little box. But then actual reality occasionally gives you this gift. It doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like crazy town, but it's a gift of saying, blowing away the ego cage. And it doesn't always feel like a gift. It can feel horrible, but you have to realize where the gift is. The gift is in removing the cage, however painful it may be, and then taking the step outside through the door into the real reality and learning something about what being is. And these are hard steps. I say them not because they're easy. I'm saying them because they're hard, but they're worth it. And you're not going to get there all at once, and you're going to reject it, and that's the ego too, and that's fine. The ego says, "Oh, that's crazy town." No, but occasionally reality will give you a gift, and one of those gifts is when everything is kind of collapsing, and because it removes all the props out of the ego's gilded cage, and it starts to tumble down, and you go, "Oh my God, everything's tumbling down," but everything isn't, right? Everything isn't. The isn't that's not tumbling down is you, the being that is you, that is not the ego. And you have to come to that realization. And it's not easy. It's not easy, and no one really wants it. At the end of the day, you don't go seeking it because it's a difficult road. But when it's thrust upon you, when reality actually intrudes, whether in an acute way or in this sort of global way, you learn something about reality, you learn something about your being, you learn about how vast you really are, you learn about what our real connection is, our real connection as human beings, our real connection as members of a family or in a relationship. You learn about where relationships really, the resonance matters. What happens, Margaret, how many times did we see people had a relationship, but you put you take away the ego props, and that relationship just dissolves because it was built on the ego props.
Right.
It wasn't built on the true resonance, the true heart. But the true heart relationships don't matter. They last through death. They last through time. They last through anything because it's a true heart relationship, because it's eternal to eternal. The ones that are built on ego props are time limited and based on whether you have a fast car or a lot of hair or a hairy car or something like that. But that's what I'm trying to say. All those ego props are getting kind of knocked down right now, and it feels kind of scary and kind of crazy, but it's freedom. It's freedom. This crazy song that we played, but it's truly an opportunity to grasp, and it's people are going to reject it, but sometimes the reality won't let you reject it. Amazingly enough, reality really sometimes is really hard to get rid of. It can be hard.
Well, the experience of having everything that you thought was your world being ripped away is devastating.
It is.
Okay, it depends on how close it is to your heart. And I think of the people that really are getting sick. And no one realizes how much you take breathing for granted.
Yep.
And people always ask me, well, how you doing? My response is, I'm breathing.
You say it to everybody.
And they look at me funny. He says, well, gee, that's the only thing. It must be bad. It's like, no. Have you ever experienced what it's like not to be able to take a breath? Horrifying, terrifying, and world-ending. So breathing, this is something that we all do. We take for granted. Oh, no problem. Emphysema, or you've had some sort of disease or lung problem. People take this for granted. And this disease coming in focuses on destroying your ability to breathe.
Yeah.
Something's truly basic. And watching someone in that kind of a disease where they cannot take their next breath. I mean, it takes the life of many. Many people say, oh, well, that person died of cancer. Actually, you know what they die of?
Mm-hmm.
They die of the inability to fight off a very simple infection that takes possession of their lungs, and they cannot breathe. So that last breath is very poignant, because that was the last gasp, literally. So for the first time, people are being introduced to this concept of, you mean you die because you really just can't breathe? Yeah, really.
Yeah. And that's a basic human connection. So, what is the breath of life,
Exactly. You are incapable of taking the breath of life. And that blows people away. Honestly, this is people would rather run screaming out of the room and demand other people do other things to make sure that this doesn't happen.
Yes. And in fact, we don't want anyone to die or to not be able to breathe. But it's that realization. Don't conflate the two. It's not that death is desirable. It's to be avoided. The point is, though, that the reality is always there, and we build up these ego constructs to hide it. And go ahead.
What I'm trying to say is that the ego puts together things that are comfortable for it.
Exactly.
And reality isn't always comfortable.
Right.
And avoidance is usually the first reaction.
Right.
Okay? But this situation is an opportunity for us to truly realize that, you know what? It's not about our comfort. Realize that everything you do touches on another human being, whether you realize it or not. Just the way this virus spreads is a representation of how things touch on other people, without you realizing it.
And then in realizing this, this is the ubiquity of reality. You have, regardless, the being, and the being which is truly there, irrespective of reality, irrespective of all these things happening around them, irrespective of the ego props. When you strip all this down in these situations, in these scary situations, they're scary the first time, certainly, you realize that you're stronger than all of them, that you're eternal, that you are a being which in the moment of now is ultimately triumphant. And once you realize that, then the next moment, which may bring something new and something different, doesn't matter, because it's the next moment. And the last moment doesn't matter, because it already happened. The current freedom of your being fills the moment of now and resonates with the heart, and then finds another heart to resonate with. And then, if you truly, when you get there, you are resonating with all hearts, with all of humanity here in the being of now. It's entering into a much, much larger world, but it's actually entering into the real world rather than the ego construct, all this worry and terribleness and everything falling apart world, because that's where the ego lives, in the falling apart world. It's always a disaster. Come to this world where it's never a disaster. It's just now.
Now allows for a broadening of experience because it removes preconceived notions, ideas of what should be happening or what hasn't happened. Just removes it and abides in this moment as it is. And right now, we have reached the end of our show.
Now. So, I'm Michael Lyons.
And I'm Margaret. And thank you for listening.